Hello and welcome to my junk pile. Here we have, among other things, a CG125, Daihatsu Furosa wheels, and, interestingly, this enormous length of stainless steel C-channel. It's C-channel for most of its length until we get to the part where I cut off one flange to make a medieval style 1.5 sword. This leaves us with the wider web. I think that's wide enough for me to make a sabre blade from it. I cut the other flange away from the piece of C-channel just to give myself more room to work, and then I settled down to try and draw a sabre blade onto the web. And I've been finding it a great deal more difficult than I expected to. I've begun inexpertly hacking out the shape of a rapier. So there we have our basic sabre blade shape. Let's cut it off. It's not perfect. This is the shape I've achieved. I've got a tang carved onto the end, which means that I've established the length of the blade. So for the first time I can measure it. So it's just under 35 inches long. The material from which this sword's made is 4mm or 3/16 of an inch thick. It is of course at the moment the same thickness throughout its length. What I need to do now is to start to reduce that thickness as we travel from the tang down to the tip. I'm going to give this blade a bit of a ricasso. In other words, from here to here won't have an edge. I think I'm at the stage now where I can start defining where the ricasso ends and the blade begins. In order to make myself feel more like a proper sword maker, I've lashed out some money and bought this. You shove a small grinder in here and do up this bolt. Then you screw this threaded adapter pulley onto the end of the grinder shaft. And after that, you push this pulley down against a healthy spring. Slip the belt over all 4 pulleys. And you've got a little belt sander. This is a close-up of the surface of my medieval style sword. The finish is terrible. And this isn't a particularly bad bit, it's just as bad all the way along. This is the surface of the blade we're making now. The finish is far, far better, and that's because I splashed out on the belt sander. Here's the ricasso. And I'll show you my attempts at achieving distal taper. So I'm just sliding it past the camera here in hopes of giving you an indication of how it gets slimmer as we approach the tip. It's the most distal taper I've ever achieved, this being my 3rd sword. The blade's now, if not finished, at the stage where I feel obliged to cover the edge with tape because it's become too dangerous to handle freely while I'm working. or anyone watching this video who's been wondering whether perhaps they might like to get one of these little angle grinder driven belt sanders, or whether they're just a pointless gimmick, my experience suggests that yes, it's well worth buying one. Now that the blade is a little less unsafe to handle, I've started on the hilt. I've made this cardboard template which fits on the sword, something like this. I've drawn round it onto the skin of an old microwave oven, and I'll just cut that out with a small grinder. Here's the knuckle bow cut from the microwave carcass, which is 0.8mm thick. It seems a little flimsy to me, so I decided to cut another one from a piece of steel which is much thicker at 2mm. However, this is galvanised, and I'm going to have to go online and find some way of getting the zinc off this without scratching it off with sandpaper, because I don't want to ruin the finish. Well, the internet's adamant that I should submerge my galvanised piece of steel in muriatic acid. I don't have any of that, so here it is submerged in the juice of 6 lemons. I'm going to leave it for 48 hours and we'll see how we do. As it turned out, I didn't actually have to wait 48 hours. After 24, one face is completely free of zinc, and the other mysteriously has a little area of zinc just here clinging on, and the rest is utterly clean. I'm really glad I didn't use abrasive means to get this off, because I'd never have polished it back to this finish. This is the knuckle bow once the zinc has been removed. From a much thicker piece of steel I've cut this, and I propose to add it there to form this bit. I've welded on this extra bit to the knuckle bow, and I thought I'd get a bit posh, so I shoved it in my bench vise and hammered the tip round. Some time ago I bought myself a chopping board made of quite thin American walnut, and I've been using it for handles. So these marks show where I'm planning to scoop out the wood to accommodate the tang. No sooner said than done. Is there anything the angle grinder can't do? I've hollowed them out quite shallowly, just enough so that when clamped tightly together they'll slide over the tang with a bit of persuasion. And you can see here that I've had to relieve them a little to accommodate the fact that I've welded one bit to another on the knuckle bow, and so it suddenly gets thicker. And with that done, everything does go together reasonably well. Now that I've rounded it off with a flat wheel on a small grinder, it does look a bit more like a sword handle and less like a block of wood with a hole through the middle. I'm sure you'll have noticed from the design of the knuckle bow that I'm not one for over embellishment, but that handle is very, very plain. So I've gone ahead and drawn pencil lines all round it, 1 centimetre apart, after which I've cut grooves into it with a fine cutting disc on a Dremel. I began opening out the slots I'd cut with the Dremel using a very small round file, but I soon got extremely bored of this procedure and instead grabbed my grinder. I've done this with the tip of a flap wheel. The tip of the flap wheel leaves it looking like this, and then after that I've been over it with the Dremel. I've sanded this till it's really, really smooth and silky to the touch. I think I'm going to call that done. I don't know how I'm going to finish it. Historic examples with very light coloured wooden handles do exist. I could stain it walnut, which is hilarious because it is walnut. I could paint it black, but what I'd really like to do is get hold of a piece of stretchy leather and see if I can cover it in leather really tightly and snugly. For now, on to the pommel. While working on the handle, I did find myself wondering what on earth I was going to do about the pommel. I can fairly easily grind a piece of steel to the appropriate outside shape, but how to make the hole down the middle for the tang? Eventually I had an idea. From this discarded 4mm plate, which was thrown away on a building site because it's bent, I've been cutting a series of layers. I'm going to try and laminate a series of these together, with the centre one having a chunk removed to allow for the passage of the tang. Here's the centremost section of the pommel, marked where I'm going to cut it. At this stage I've glued all 5 bits together with my welder, and I've started trying to fill the gaps and round the whole thing off. I'll get back to you when it looks a little less of a mess. Slowly, as I grind out the imperfections and re-weld them, they get smaller. I had to actually stop myself working to come and film this because I was dying to just press on and finish it. But next time you see it, I think it'll probably be shiny and posh. It's getting pretty shiny. It'll soon be time to go over from the angle grinder to the belt sander to give it a smoother finish. In other news, I've been lucky enough to find a large enough scrap of leather to cover the handle. I'm going to remove these elastic bands and see how well I did. Things are looking quite good. Let's carry on. Here we go. This is the worst part, but I think I can fix that. I just snipped little tiny bits of black leather and spent 15 minutes super gluing them into the tiny bright wooden cracks. I'm quite pleased with this. I've polished up the knuckle bow as best I can to match the pommel. It's time to bend it into shape. I bent the knuckle bow around an old gas cylinder and then welded it to the pommel, as you see here. Let's assemble the entire sword and see how it looks. Let's just remind ourselves of what we started with. Here we see the cement spattered length of C channel, which gave us our blade, the 2mm galvanized plate, which gave us the knuckle bow, the 4mm plate, which of course gave us the pommel, the wooden chopping board from which we made the handle, and last but not least, the fanny pack or bum bag from which we cut the leather to cover the handle. So from these simple elements of rubbish lying around my garden, we've made this. Let's have a close-up look. I haven't peened it together yet. It's just sitting there, but it's all as I want it. Peening will be the last job. Here's the peen. I'm the first to admit that it's not very pretty, but it is my very first peened hilt. When I make these swords, I try and push myself a little each time and do something I haven't done before. The handle of this I found quite challenging, and the hilt in general. It's not the correct steel to use to make the blade of a functional sword, but it was easy enough to straighten out, and now it's going to hang on my wall. With my other 2 swords. Thanks for watching.